Hello and welcome to Cafe DC. I'm Faiz Rahman. Today we are going to talk to a renowned former diplomat, Ambassador Mark Grossman. He's going to talk about the crisis in Ukraine, the situation in Afghanistan, and important events in Pakistan. Let's watch it. Ambassador Grossman, thank you very much for being on our show today.
Thank you for having me.
Since Ukraine is all over and it's on everybody's mind, let's start off with the situation in Ukraine. They have the Crimean parliament, the legislature actually, they have decided to hold a referendum.
Right.
So what's going on? What's your take as a seasoned former diplomat? What do you think is going on there?
Well, Ukraine's a serious situation, and I think what the Russians have done in sending their troops into Crimea and trying to raise the tensions there, I think it's a very serious matter. I also think it's important to recognize what Ukrainians, the people, did out there in the square in the Maidan. You know, their former leader said, we want to get allied with Russia, we want to be part of this larger Russian economic zone. And the people said, no, actually not. We'd like to be members of the European Union. We'd like to be free people. We'd like to be a democratic country. So there's a real struggle going on in Ukraine. I think it's very good that Secretary Kerry is speaking to Foreign Minister Lavrov of the Soviet Union, of Russia. I think that there's a lot of conversation going on, and that's important. I think as you and I were talking before, as Dr. Kissinger wrote this morning in the Washington Post, you know, there's got to be an effort now to recognize that less tension will likely bring you more results. And I think that's a very important thing to go on. But one of the things that Dr. Kissinger said, I think that's important, is that the Ukrainians ought to be able to choose for themselves where they live, how they live, who they're allied to.
There seems a lot of polarization when it comes to the coverage. There is one Russian narrative, and then you see a Western narrative, including the United States. And you know, very interesting episodes happen. Two Russian TV, RT broadcasters, and one of them actually resigned on the air, and one of them basically she used some very strong words about the Russian policy and President Putin himself. So do you think, is there any middle road? And you alluded to Dr. Kissinger's article in the Washington Post. It seems a little bit more nuanced and balanced, so to speak, because, you know, it also seems to empathize with Putin's position, because Ukraine being part of that region, especially the Russia's name itself coming from that region, and Ukraine basically just got their independence in 1954. They've been part of, in some or other way, part of some other nation. So what do you think? I mean, is there really a polarization, and is there any empathy in the United States as well as in the West with Putin's position, with the Russian position? Because, you know, they're...
Yeah, I think two things about your very good question. First, you make a really important point about the very different narratives in the West and in Russia. I thought Mr. Putin's press conference the other day was a remarkable thing in the sense that he has a completely different view of what's happening in Ukraine. And in a sense, I think that is an argument for the kinds of proposals that Secretary Kerry and others have been making about, let's send some OSCE observers there. Let's see if we can get some facts on the ground. Because I don't think, from what I've been able to see, that the kinds of narrative and story that Mr. Putin were talking about, I don't think those are going to be sustained by the facts. But I think to get a third-party set of observers would be really a very important thing. Second, on the points that Mr. Kissinger said, I took it slightly differently, with all due respect. Not so much that he emphasized or empathized with Mr. Putin. He was trying, I think, to lay out for an American audience kind of how Russians see this in the sense of Ukraine's history and the Ukrainian-Russian history. I don't think he had much sympathy for what Mr. Putin had done. What he was trying, as you said, was to remind people that perhaps, you know, there is this middle way, first of all, and secondly, that Ukrainians themselves are in the end going to have to sit down with one another and try to figure out how to have a society that's pluralistic and tolerant and large enough to incorporate, of course, not just the Russian-speaking people, but Turkic-speaking people, others, Tatars. That's a multi-ethnic society. Absolutely, it's a multi-ethnic society that everyone is going to have to be a part of. It's also why I think it's important that all sides at the moment, maybe good, are talking about the need for an election soon.
Do you have trust and confidence in the international diplomats on both sides of the aisle, like the West and the Russian side, that they have the capacity to reach a consensus to end this crisis without causing much damage?
Well, I think Kissinger said a number of very interesting things. He also said, foreign policy was a matter of setting priorities. And I think that the kinds of things that you and I have been talking about here are the kinds of priorities in Ukraine that are so important. In other words, a society in which everyone there can live. Ukrainians being able to choose for themselves, how they want to live, who they are allied to, what organizations they want to be a part of, and recognizing Ukraine's history as well. So priorities are important here. Second, as you say, the question of, do I have confidence in the people who are doing the diplomacy today? Sure, I do. And that is because I think the one thing that is for sure is there doesn't seem to be anybody in this conversation who's interested in armed conflict. And that's a very important point. And if all of the diplomats involved on all sides of this will keep that, as Kissinger said, as their priority, no armed conflict, we're not interested in a war here, then I hope the diplomats will find their way to some kind of a solution. But a solution, as I say, that protects the sacrifices and the kinds of message that the people of Ukraine have been trying to send, which is, let us choose for ourselves how we wish to live.
Some very strong words were used by especially the Republican side for President Obama's leadership on this crisis. Feckless leadership, directionless, indecisive. What do you think the president should do?
Well, of course, we're a great democracy, and so everybody has their say, and that's a very good thing and a positive thing. I think the president faces a couple of challenges. He faces, first of all, the today challenge. What is Secretary Kerry going to tell the Russian Foreign Minister, Mr. Lavrov? How are they going to move forward here over the next few days? But I think it's also the responsibility of the president to think strategically here and in the longer term, to think, if you would, beyond sanctions and military maneuvers and visa bans, but to think about kind of how you structure this larger Western conversation so that in the future that the balance of power here kind of comes back to be in favor of the West. And I'll give you 3 examples. So first of all, there's going to be a NATO summit in Wales this summer. Well, you would have guessed that when leaders got together this summer after the combat mission in Afghanistan will end on December of 2014, that they would have got together in Wales and kind of said, wow, here finally we're going to have no NATO forces deployed for the first time in 20 years. And what's the alliance all about? Well, now that summit in Wales, I think, becomes extremely important because you have to speak to young Europeans, young Americans, young people all around the world. What's NATO for? Are these values that we protect, are they still important? So number one, I hope the president is thinking about what kinds of statements and policies and conversation that he'll lead at the NATO summit in Wales. Second, as you'll also have seen, I think very interestingly in the press over the past few days, there's also a question of energy security. In 2009, when the Russians turned off the gas in Ukraine, it was a huge crisis, not just for Ukrainians, but for Europeans as well. Well, Europeans have done a very good job over the years of lessening their dependence on Russian gas, but there's a lot more that can be done.
Germany gets 40% of
Well, exactly right. But what's the big news here? The big news is the shale gas revolution in the United States and the possibility that the United States could become an exporter of gas and oil. In other words, to increase the supply, increase the diversity of supply around the world so that countries like Ukraine and others might not be subject to this kind of blackmail in the future. So energy, I think, is extremely, extremely important. And I noticed that former Secretary of State George Shultz the other day called for the approval of the Keystone Pipeline from Canada as a strategic move. And the third thing, and you may consider this kind of at first glance maybe not connected, but I think it's connected, and that is to really focus in now on this transatlantic trade and investment partnership.
Very good. Ambassador, before we go to our next topic, we'll take a short break here, and then we'll come back and talk about the situation in Afghanistan. So please stay with us. We will be back after a short break.
Each week here at Cafe DC, I go one-on-one. Politicians, literary giants, activists, power brokers, and many more from different walks of life. And focusing on what matters is my cup of, shall we say, coffee. matters that make a difference in the society. Watch me, Faiz Rahman, on Cafe DC every week only on PTV World.
Welcome back. Okay, Ambassador, now let's go to the region that you have spent a lot of time with, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Afghanistan is going through a major change and also upheaval. They're having elections next month. There have been news all over about not just the elections, but Mr. Karzai's statements about the relationship, the future relationship between the United States and Afghanistan. He has refused to sign the BSA, the bilateral security agreement. And again, this unfortunate incident happened where 5 more Afghan soldiers were killed in a friendly fire, quote unquote. So what's going on in Afghanistan? What you think should be done or should not be done?
As you say, I had the good fortune and the honor to represent the United States as the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan for 2 years, 2011, 2012, and that was my honor and allowed me to kind of engage on some of these very important issues. I think 3 things, if you'd allow me. First, and that is I think we shouldn't forget, and the public in Pakistan should not forget, Americans shouldn't forget, that a very great deal has been accomplished in Afghanistan since 2003. If you say, you know, Afghanistan's going through a great upheaval, well, I would say what Afghans are doing is trying to consolidate the gains that they have made at very great cost to themselves and to the United States, friends, partners, allies, to Pakistanis, since 2003. And you know all the statistics. The people who are today in school, the economy that grows 9%. You know, one of my favorites, you know, in 2003, there were 12,000 cell phone contracts in Afghanistan. There's 16 million cell phone contracts in Afghanistan today. Women who made, I think, quite a lot of progress in Afghanistan, although there is clearly more to do. So I think we start with the reminder that quite a lot has been accomplished. Second really important point is, yes, this election on the 5th of April seems like, you know, that there's a lot of kind of anxiety and tumult around it. And yet, what's happening here? If the Afghans, and I believe they can, if the Afghans can have an election that is successful and that shows that the next leader of Afghanistan is legitimate in the eyes of most Afghans, what will they have done? For the first time in their history, they will have made a democratic transition from one president to another. And when you look at the statistics, and again, who knows what will happen on the 5th of April, but I believe that the Independent Election Commission there has increased their capacity to do this job. They've announced, what, 22,000 polling stations all around Afghanistan. The Afghan National Security Forces are working on a plan to make sure that those are secure and they're safe. There's been a voter registration drive going on since last September. Millions of new voters have been registered. So I think all of us, Pakistanis, Americans, Europeans, everybody, have to do all that we can to support the Afghans as they have this election on the 5th of April, because it's a historic event. I saw a very interesting poll the other day from, I think, the Asia Society, the Asia Foundation, that 77% of Afghans think that this election will have a positive impact on their lives. You know, 57% of Afghans think their country's going in the right direction. And you and I, who live in the United States, you wouldn't get that number here. I don't know what the number is in Pakistan, but you know, you and I as Americans know that's not the number in the United States. So let's first of all say there's a lot that needs to be protected and I think honored as well. And again, at great sacrifice. Second, I think you make a very good point about this bilateral security agreement. And it means a lot to me because I had a chance to help participate in negotiating the strategic partnership agreement that led to the BSA. And I hope this bilateral security agreement will be signed. And why do I hope that? Because I hope that President Obama will decide to leave a robust number of American troops in Afghanistan after January 1, 2015. And I hope that our European allies and our friends and our partners will join in that effort as well. You need a BSA for that to be done, because no American president could leave our forces on the ground without some kind of status of forces agreement. So I think that the administration has done all that they could here. They've offered to sign this with President Karzai. As President Obama, I think, made a statement last week or 2 weeks ago, President Karzai is not interested in signing the BSA, but all of the candidates who are currently running for president have said that they will sign if they are elected. So 10 candidates, 11 candidates have said they will sign. And I think the administration has done all it can, which is to say, fine, President Karzai chooses not to sign, we'll sign with the next person. And that's about the best that can be done, I think.
You mentioned the gains that the Afghan people have made throughout these years, the achievements, the monumental changes at the societal level. And yes, of course, you see those changes. But Karzai made another statement. He accused the West, especially the United States, that we went into this war for our interest, for the Western interest, for the American interest, not to do anything good for the people of Afghan. I mean, in so many words, that was the gist of his message. Very controversial to say the least, but do you agree, are we at the risk of losing all those gains when we leave that region?
Well, first, I think, and this is a personal opinion, I'm a foreigner, I'm an outsider, I'm not an Afghan. But I believe that Afghans are going to fight for what they've achieved since 2001, 2, and 3. They're not going to just sit back and say, oh, well, all of these things we've achieved, we're just going to let them go away. I think they're going to fight. And the question for us as Americans and our friends, our partners, our allies, and maybe the people of Pakistan as well, is do you have the patience and the courage to now support the Afghans in their fight? And so I think the facts here speak for themselves, which is, yes, we went to Afghanistan to respond to the terrible attacks of September 11, 2001. But what's been done since? Americans, Afghans, allies, partners, many others, both military and civilian, have made sacrifice, lost their lives for the kinds of changes that you and I have been talking about. And I think Afghans will fight for those changes. Now, one of the reasons I hope, again, that the international community will keep a robust presence in Afghanistan. One of the reasons I hope that the international community will meet the obligations to the ANSF that it made in Chicago at the NATO summit in 2012 and in Tokyo for economic assistance in 2012 in July is because the Afghans will continue to need our support. So if you say to me, will it all disappear if everybody leaves? Well, I don't think everybody's going to leave. I think Afghans will fight, but do they still need some support for the next few years in security, economics, building up the private sector, governance, work on corruption? Yes, of course they do.
Ambassador, we have the situation in Afghanistan, and then again, Pakistan. If you look at Pakistan, America is not a very popular country despite all that it has done there. And of course, there have been issues on both sides, and there are some complaints on both sides, genuine complaints. Yes, you're basically saying that the West and the United States is actually going to remain engaged in the region. Are we going to repeat the 90s after 2014 if things don't work out the way the administration foresees?
No, I don't think we're going to return to the mistakes of the 1990s. And that's the whole reason to stay engaged in Afghanistan. It's the whole reason to continue the relationship with Pakistan. And if you'd allow me, it's also the reason to be in favor of the regional structures which were established in Istanbul at the great conference there in November of 2011. Because the region is a really important thing. I've always thought that a secure, stable, prosperous Afghanistan will be a part of a secure, stable, and prosperous region. And so there's a regional aspect of this as well, of which Pakistan is a really important part. I think that Pakistanis should be very happy with the fact that first Hillary Clinton and then Secretary Kerry have paid a huge amount of attention to Pakistan.
So let's stay on Pakistan. Okay. Pakistan again is gone through a major change. Nawaz Sharif came back as a third time as a prime minister, and now they're trying to resolve this issue of terrorism. They want to reach some kind of an agreement with the militants or terrorists, basically the Taliban. So what's your take? I mean, right now they're talking. When you were the SRAB there, of course this must have come up quite a few times. And the United States position, as I remember, was always that, yes, maybe talks is not a good option. But then again, the United States started talking to the Afghan Taliban, in the background, and then again in the open. Now that the Pakistanis are talking to them, do you think there is any hope of getting some kind of a resolution out of the situation?
Well, we'll see. That depends, I think, very much on what the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP, feel is kind of their end game. And I'd say a couple of things. One is, I think one of the big changes that I have noticed in Pakistan over the past couple of years is that I think since the summer of 2012 and somewhere around that time, I think there's an increasing recognition on the part of Pakistanis and the part of Pakistani leadership of exactly what a threat the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, really is to Pakistan. And so don't forget, one of the reasons that the TTP, I think, the Pakistani Taliban, is at talks is because the government said we're prepared to take military action.
And they did,
And they
actually.
did. And so this is not, it's not a coincidence. Not a coincidence that when the government of Pakistan is prepared to defend itself and defend its people and defend its borders in the way that they have been doing over the past few months, it's not a coincidence that the other side then says, oh, now I'm interested in talks. We found the same thing with the Afghan Taliban. You've been kind enough to say on a couple of occasions, I had this lot of experience in diplomacy.
Absolutely. It's not
But one of the things that is true about diplomacy is that diplomacy that's not backed by force, sometimes not diplomacy at all. And so I think what the government of Pakistan has shown is that there are two sides to this conversation. Second thing that I hope, and again, I'm a foreigner, I'm not a Pakistani, I give this advice as an outsider, is that a little bit like we did with our own attempt to talk to the Taliban, and you'll recall we did that for the purpose of opening the door for Afghans to talk to other Afghans about the future of Afghanistan. But one of the things we did was we said we have no preconditions, but we have end conditions about how this should come out, that you have to end violence, to break with Al-Qaeda in terms of the Afghan Taliban, and also, very importantly, to live inside of an Afghanistan that's about the rule of law and the Constitution and the rights of women. And so I hope that the Pakistani government, and I'm sure that they do, has clear end conditions as well, so that the Pakistani Taliban know kind of what it is that they want at the end of this negotiation, that the government demands. Because it's very important, it seems to me, again, as an outsider, that Pakistanis can feel that at the end of this negotiation, they'll have less terrorism and less violence and less fear and less attacks from a group like the Pakistani Taliban.
Ambassador, you said the United States is not going to leave the region. We're going to stay engaged. And one of the indications that we saw this week was when the president, when he proposed the budget for 2015, he sanctioned over $1 billion for Pakistan. So that's also, that shows that the administration is still interested and they want to, remain engaged with Pakistan. But there's something in the press that when Holbrooke died, you took over, and basically the engagement with Pakistan not just reduced or went down, actually it ended. One of the New York Times columnists, actually, he made this comment in his column. Do you agree?
No, I really don't. With all due respect to the New York Times and to the columnist, I think you have to go back and think about events in 2011. After Ambassador Holbrooke died at the end of 2010, I did have this opportunity to take on this responsibility. And 2011, I must say, it couldn't have been any worse year between the United States and Pakistan. It started with the Raymond Davis case, as you will recall, and then there was Abbottabad in the middle of the year, and then at the end of the year, the terrible killing by accident by U.S. forces of Pakistanis, 26 Pakistanis on the border at Salalah. So 2011 was a very challenging year in U.S.-Pakistan relations. But what we tried to keep up our conversation throughout that time. And I think that if you look at from the middle of 2011, after the Pakistani parliament talked about the requirements for U.S.-Pakistan relations, there's a huge increase then in the conversation between Americans and Pakistanis. And I'd say one other interesting thing about 2011, which kind of laid the basis for what you're seeing today, I think, is one of the things that kept up throughout that entire year was the U.S., Pakistan, Afghan core group to talk about the future of Afghanistan. So it wasn't easy, but I think by the time that Secretary Kerry was becoming the Secretary of State, that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship was kind of on an upward glide again, thanks to Secretary Clinton and others. But I think we left for Secretary Kerry a situation that was better than it was in December of 2011. I hope so anyway. And of course for Pakistanis, as I said, Secretary Clinton had great, I think, empathy, and we were talking about before, for Pakistan, and Secretary Kerry Lugar Berman, this great aid program, now Secretary of State, and I think someone who really understands the region. Part of this, of course, is the responsibility of Pakistanis as well. And one of the things that I have always felt is you have in Pakistan, a highly educated, resilient, cultured, educated people with great entrepreneurial skills. And one of the things is that the United States should be involved in is kind of trying opening as many doors as possible for Pakistanis. And that's why this aid program, for example, is focused on energy production. It's focused on entrepreneurship, on women, on the private sector, because all those, I think, are about the future.
Coming from your experience with Pakistan, what is the most powerful strength between the two countries in terms of relationship that we can capitalize on?
Well, I think the most interesting part of that relationship is when it comes down to kind of human beings, actually. One of the things, and you know this better than I do, if you look at the Pakistani Americans, the Pakistani diaspora in the United States, and you see Pakistanis in Pakistan, what are we interested in? Family and the capacity to make decisions about our own lives, that our children should live better lives, that we should have a sustainable economy, that we should have an end to this kind of terrorism. And there's this growing middle class in Pakistan, grows every year. And I think that a lot of the values that group of people have is very much like the values that we have in the United States. One of the things that we tried to do in 2011, 2012 was kind of increase the contact between private Pakistanis and private Americans. The other thing is I think that Pakistan and the United States share, I hope we share, a real commitment to a secure, stable, and prosperous region. And as you said, we've had our disagreements over the years about safe havens, and we've had our disagreements about terrorism. But I think fundamentally, Pakistan, and I think people see it clearly now with the attacks by the Pakistani Taliban, Pakistan is a more stable, more secure, more prosperous country if there's a secure, stable, and prosperous region. And that's something the United States very much believes in.
Ambassador, you spend a lot of time in the public sector, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Public Affairs, and then of course the SRAP, very deep involvement with that region. Now you're again a private citizen. You made another try before 2011. After 2005 you retired, and then any plans of going back once called upon?
Oh no. I say, well, it's a great mixed emotion for me, of course, because I became the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan because of the death of my friend, Ambassador Holbrooke. And so when
because President Obama and Secretary Clinton, they basically,
well, that's what I say. When after Ambassador Holbrooke died, when President Obama and Secretary Clinton, asked if I would do this, my answer, of course, was yes, because I wanted to honor the work that Dick Holbrooke had done, and I thought there was work more that I might be able to contribute to. I told Secretary Clinton I would do it for her and for President Obama for those 2 years, 2011, 2012, and I did my best, and it's for others to judge whether we were successful or unsuccessful. I then retired again at the end of 2012, and came back to the job I had taken in 2000.
Ambassador Grossman, thank you very much for being with us. It's a pleasure having you on Cafe DC.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.